Hi everybody, this is Lindsay from North End Organic Nursery, and here's your Garden Minutes. Today we're going to be talking about pruning fruit trees, and I am here with Niky from Split Pea Landscaping here in her beautiful edible backyard. Now, we are still in the middle of COVID right now, and for safety's sake, we've got our masks on now, but we will be dropping them down when we have a safe distance between us, but we'll have it handy just in case. So that way, if you're not hearing us very well, it'll make it just a little bit easier. Welcome, Niky. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Hey, everybody. Thank you.
Now, you do a lot of pruning for people all around the valley, but you're really big on empowering people so that they can do it themselves, because at the end of the day, it's not that scary.
No.
Yeah.
And mistakes happen, and that's okay. I mean, I think often we are a little bit afraid to take the first cut because we're afraid the tree won't recover, but we found that when we try to stop controlling things so much as humans, the tree's gonna be just fine.
So what kind of tree do we have here?
This is a plum, and plums are known for suckering quite a bit after you're pruning, and throughout the season they're known for having a lot of twisty water sprouts coming up and suckers that come and find their way through. And so today we're going to be cleaning out the center, opening it up into kind of a nest shape and bringing it way down. I tend to prune pretty heavy so that I can keep fruit where I'm gonna be down on the ground, because ladders aren't really my jam if I don't have to be on one for picking fruit. So,
well, that makes a lot of sense, especially for the home grower. If you want to have harvestable fruit, there's no reason why you can't sort of bonsai your tree in a way that makes it so that you can grab most of your fruit between your own height and maybe a step stool.
Right, so we try to train it in kind of a nest form, and then we want to go up and out and just continue to go up and out. One of the reasons we do the nest shape is to allow air circulation within the tree so that we can try to avoid some of the diseases that happen without good circulation. Another reason we do that is so that we get sunlight in through the center and we can ripen the fruit that would be on the closer inside of the tree instead of what we're seeing presenting on the outside of the tree.
I get a lot of people who ask, why bother pruning a tree at all? Because in nature, if this was hypothetically a naturally growing tree, there's nobody there to prune it. What's the purpose of pruning it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. One thing, we're not in nature, and
these aren't natural trees.
These are not natural trees, and they're most often grafted onto a different rootstock. And so trees in town on our homesteads require pruning, just like our large trees that you should call an arborist for.
What would happen if you didn't prune your trees?
Oh, that's a great question. Lots of things like this would happen if you don't prune your trees. Okay. You'd have rubbing of branches. You would have, you would probably have damage and fusing that would happen. Right here, I don't know if you can zoom in on this, but you can see that this shoot right here is beginning to rub. And if I didn't take care of that, it would fuse to the other one and then create space for disease and all sorts of bad stuff to get into.
Now, if you weren't going to prune a tree, let's say somebody inherits a tree that has been growing without any human intervention for a long time, is there a way to rehab a tree?
Oh yeah, we call it Rehab. And typically, we actually see quite a bit of that, and usually they're really large, mature trees. We see a lot with apple trees and apricots. One of the things, the first thing I would say is that you don't ever want to take more than a third of the at a time of the tree. When we prune this today, it's going to look like it's more than a third because it's going to be significantly different looking, but it's truly not. With mature trees, you take small amounts at a time and really focus on the larger branches that are going to be crossing or causing a lot of problems from the beginning. Sometimes it is worth calling an arborist in for those sorts of things, somebody who's trained in fruit tree pruning and not just ornamentals, because they are two very different types of pruning. The other thing I would say about mature fruit trees that haven't been managed in years is that it's slow and steady.
Sure.
So expect it to take like 3 to 5 years of rehab before you're really, if the goal is to bring fruit down lower, which is usually what we see from folks. They've got these big, beautiful apple trees and nobody can harvest anything.
Sure.
You're never gonna have fruit back down at this level if your tree is 25 feet tall.
No doubt.
But you can slowly bring it down. Just don't get over eager the first year or even the first couple of years.
But I mean, not to jump around here, but that really emphasizes the importance of pruning when you start with a brand new tree. Like
Absolutely.
getting started that first year, it's never going to be that hard if you stay on top of it.
Absolutely. And the other thing, I mean, that's a really great point, because one of the things we see often are folks who come through and they'll plant their bare root fruit trees are a great example. And bare root fruit trees are always a little bit weird, oddly shaped. And the very first thing you're going to do with that is make some heavy, kind of heart painful cuts.
It really is.
Because you need to get that shape right.
Okay, so you're looking at a tree like this guy.
Yep.
Or any tree. Do you have an order of operations? Like what's the first thing you analyze when you look at a tree for pruning?
Yeah, the first thing I do is I go through and I take a look at any branches that absolutely have to go. That means anything that is rubbing up against something else, anything that is diseased or looks dead. Those cuts happen first because those are non-negotiable. Those ones have to go, and then that will dictate the shape of your tree from there.
Absolutely.
Or where you can or cannot prune, or the height you're bringing it down to.
One of the things I always try to do when I'm looking at a tree is find all that dead stuff and say, okay, is that attached to something else that will eventually need to be taken out too? Because it's always easier to do a big cut versus a little cut.
So that's exactly right, Lindsay. That's actually my second order of business, and my first few orders are all visual.
Yeah.
So are there branches that are rubbing? Are there branches that are dead and diseased? Are there branches that are crossing? And then are those branches the big branches? I would much rather make a couple of larger cuts than 47 small cuts on one branch.
Okay, so once you have figured out the major branches that are going to be coming out, tell me what are the different tools that you need to have on hand in order to make some of these cuts?
Yeah, excellent. You want a pair of large loppers that can handle something above 1 3/4 or 2-inch caliper branches. You want to have a sharp pruning saw for areas that you can't use the loppers in. And then you want to have a pair of pruners, sharpened pruners. One of the ways to tell if your pruners are sharpened well enough is to take your fingernail. Don't do this if you really love your fingernails. And just kind of scratch the surface of your blade. If your fingernail kind of scrapes off there, then your blade is sharp. I'm sure there's a technical way to, tell people to do that, but that's the trick I learned from my mentors over the years.
I love it that's going to be a real gardener right there. They're going to sacrifice their fingernails to find out how sharp their pruners are.
For sure. The other thing that I really love to have on hand is my pole cutters, my pole pruners. This is really great if your trees are still a manageable height and you can see where the buds are facing in the shadow, and then you can just put this up top, hook it around, so I don't have to get up on a ladder. So the first thing I'm gonna do is look at my tree, and I know that this tree has had some diseased branches throughout the year because I live here and see it. And so those guys I actually took off earlier, because if you see disease moving through, it is okay to chop off that branch at that time during the season. Otherwise, you really do want to wait until February during the dormancy period so everything heals up properly. Okay, one thing you want to pay attention to when you're pruning your fruit tree and making your cuts is the color of the branch. The color is this kind of wrinkle right here, and you can see it on both the top and the bottom. You don't want to cut into that collar, or you're wounding the tree and making it harder for it to heal over itself. So you want to cut just above the collar and below, right at a little bit of an angle. Can you see that better?
Yep.
Next big branches that need to go are anything that are moving in towards the center or starting to rub. Since I took that one out, now I can see where those center branches are going. So I'm going to take out this branch going straight into the center here, and these branches also coming into the center. It also means this branch will go. We'll start there. These pruners are big enough for this size of a cut. I'm going to grab my loppers for a branch that's this size. Angle above the collar. Better to cut too little first than to cut too much the first time. One of the things you do want to be cautious of, if you've got to take out a large branch, you want to take the weight off the branch first before you do the cut down at the tree. And so you would say, I'm taking out this entire branch here. I'm not doing that. But if I were, I would cut off these larger pieces first so that I'm working with just a small amount of branch. Then I would make a cut on the bottom and then my cut on the top, so that when that branch does come down, it's not breaking and pulling the bark off and damaging the tree. Again, these branches are coming off because they are coming in towards the tree. I'm going to take off this big branch right here. Started as probably a sucker with rapid vertical growth. But I noticed when I was looking at it that I've got a lot of branching that's all heading this direction. So eventually those things are going to run into each other when they're a large tree. And so I want to take that off now so I can avoid any kind of accidental rubbing or fusing of branches later on down the road. This would be another example of that. I can pick which one based on one, either fruit production because I could see budding happening, or two, because of structure of the overall tree. I've got a branch right here that is actually going to be loaded with buds, but it needs to go because it's hanging out inside the chicken coop. When you have rubbing, it's like having an open wound. And so you want to make sure that you want to get rid of anything that could potentially cause damage and welcome disease in later.
So as far as timing goes on pruning, February seems to be kind of like that sweet spot when it comes to pruning, because you don't have the bud break yet. The trees are kind of moving away from dormancy, but they're still dormant. We're not in the dead of winter where there's a lot of cold damage that could be possible. We don't really get super cold winters here, it seems like, anymore, but at the same time, if we were to have a super hard cold snap in January, that might be a little too soon to prune, because you might be pruning out more damage that might have happened to the tree from those colder months. I think I've pruned my trees as late as mid-March to late March, just depending on the year. And that's one of the most
And depending on bud break.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the most important things about working with plants is that they don't know the calendar. Every year is different.
Every year is different, especially nowadays. One thing I think we should talk about is when you come up against a branch where you've got a main branch and then you've got three smaller branches coming from it, and choosing which one of those to keep. So here, this might be a good example. There's a lot of visualizing that happens in fruit tree pruning, or pruning at all. And the idea is that you can visualize what will happen in the future if you don't take care of something now. So right now I've got a nice spacing between here and here, or here and here. But all three of these together will eventually be too close together. I, of course, don't know exactly what will happen, but if I can imagine my fruit tree growing and the branches getting bigger, they will at some point be too close together, which will cause circulation problems, maybe breaking or fusing or anything like that. So I probably want to choose two of these to keep and maybe two to get rid of. Because this is already headed in towards the tree, it makes most sense to get rid of the center one and allow this branching to happen here. Now, when we're looking at that and we're making those cuts and decisions, we also want to think about the branches that are next to it. Right now, if I keep this branch, these two will rub and cross and run into each other. So that means potentially this branch will go as well, and this will be the main branch that I look towards for coming out. When I step back and take a look at the shape of my tree, I want to look at where I want my highest point to be, my tallest branch. And from there, I take a look around, say this is going to be my tallest branch that's coming out. When I look at that, that means I would take this guy all the way down. Now, if I take this guy all the way down and this is my tall branch, do I have that around the rest of the tree? Otherwise, I have one wild hair coming out and there's nothing available on the other side that helps me keep the shape that I'm looking for long term. Right now I've got branches that are parallel, and so one of these needs to go or I can cut one of them back and train it to go a different direction. I actually think it's going to be most beneficial for the tree if I take this branch out altogether. But I do have some fruit down low this year, and so because this is only, this will be heading into its 3rd season of fruit when I'm technically allowed to harvest all of my fruit, I'm going to go ahead and keep this branch on this season and cut this back to direct it so that it doesn't hit, and I can prune it off next year after the fruit's gone. I'm going to take this branch first because it's wimpy, and if it holds fruit or fruits, it's going to weigh down and break, and I want to avoid that if I can. You want to be just above the bud, not too low, not too high. If you were to cut right at, then you will have damaged that bud, and likely this guy will be the one that shoots out instead. Gotcha. If that happens, oh well, it's okay. Worse things have happened before. You'll actually notice, you'll notice in trees that you've pruned previously that sometimes you'll have a little stump that comes out and nothing actually, no new branching happened there. Mm-hmm. That's because there was bud damage when you made the cut to begin with. So I have directed this bud to go out and grow this way for us. These branches are crossing, and so I need to choose, and it's not going to be this guy because it's problematic for several different branches, and I don't have a need for it to come out and come this way because this is my access point for my chicken coop, so that can come off. This is coming off because I don't want it to bear fruit as well. I'm going to choose which one of these I want after I get rid of this one that will eventually be rubbing against this one. I would like to talk about briefly the importance of having clean and sterile tools when you're pruning. You don't want to pass disease around from tree to tree. And so you want to make sure that between trees, you are sanitizing your tools. You can use a 10% bleach solution if you are comfortable with that. And you can also use 99% rubbing alcohol, or if you have disease, obvious disease on trees, you do want to try to sanitize between cuts if you can, so you're not moving disease from this branch to another branch. This is one of those examples where you start getting to cutting smaller branches, and then you realize, actually, I'd like this whole thing to go all together. My branches are a little bit too close together, and some of them look a little bit healthier and like they have more fruit. So I'm going to get rid of this branch.
So what you're doing now looks like a heading cut. And are you going to try to take down most of those really tall branches to a level where they're going to be pointing outward?
Correct. That's exactly what I'm doing at this point. I would never recommend taking and hedging a tree. You do want to be mindful about each individual cut. But because my trees are still young, especially in the younger stages, if they're first year tree or second year tree, young meaning like the first 3 years really, I really want to bring my tree down, promote all of that fruit production down low, and train things to come out instead of going straight up. Sometimes when you are considering large cuts, you want to take some time to walk around and talk through what each of the branching is going to do. Lindsay and I were just discussing the potential of taking out this big central branch here, mostly because it's got a lot of parallel branching happening with other things. Right now, when we're looking at the tree, we already have crossing branches and rubbing going on here, so this would need to come down regardless. And it's possible that next season I can make the decision if one of these two actually needs to go, because they're just a little bit too close together. So for now, I'm going to take this branch off and encourage this branch to come out this way.
That looks good.
I'd like this branch to continue going the direction that it is, but I do want to bring it down. So I'm going to find the next bud that's about the height that I want from the rest of my top point and cut above there. Now we can see the wild hairs we've got going on left that we need to take care of. This is that patience part. That branch is going in towards the center. This branch is going straight up, and I do not want to encourage straight up vertical growth. I likely would have seen flowering on those guys, but again, I don't want anything that's going to be up so high that I can't manage it. When you don't prune those suckers, you also encourage fruit growth to happen higher instead of lower. And because long term I want my fruit growth to be lower, it's important to take those off now, not let them get too excited about their potential for height. Make sure that if you're using a pole cutter that you are not just cutting willy-nilly wherever. You still want to make sure those cuts are still important. That is quite a difference from the tree when we first looked at it. We've got all the branches that were potentially going to cause problems with crossing or going straight into the center are now gone. I've brought our tree down to the height that is manageable for me. We'll do the same thing again next year.
Always one more cut, isn't there?
There's always one more cut, and actually that's very true, because often when your branch drops or you're pulling a branch out, there's some little piece of damage. Don't just pull it off, do cut it off so you have a nice clean cut. Years of pruning over here and creating a space that is safe for mostly our flighty friends, but also things like insects like to live in there, and then I can encourage them to hang out in my space more.
Niky, thank you so much for letting us into your backyard today and showing us how to prune. I'm going to put some links in the description below that will have some references that you can look at from the University of Idaho's Extension. They have some great documents on pruning for fruit trees and different types of fruit trees. Lots of different techniques and methods out there. Just remember that when you're going to prune your fruit trees, you're doing it for a few different reasons. You're trying to create more airspace. You're trying to create more light. You're trying to create good form and long-term habit in there. You're trying to get rid of all of the diseased and dead, dying stuff in there. And don't forget that sometimes less is more. The fewer branches you have on a tree, it may seem like that you've just dismantled that tree completely, but that will lend more energy to the fruit that it does produce, and that's always a good thing. Thanks again for having us in your backyard. This has been a wonderful experience, and I wish you all could see what she has going on back here, but it is quite the permaculture wonder. I love it.
Thanks, Lindsay. And thanks for the opportunity to share. And like Lindsay said, there's lots of information and lots of resources out there. So make sure you keep learning, and happy pruning, everyone.